Hello, welcome to Books and Brews,
the place where beer and literature meet.
With your host, certified Cicerone Michael Agnew.
And Laura Vosica, author of the Bluebells Chronicles.
Each month we invite a guest author to read their words and talk about writing while sipping beers specially paired with their work.
Today's guest is Jen Gilroy.
So sit back,
pop a cold one,
and dive into some books
and brews.
That clock is running.
That clock is running. Then we are ready to go. And I have to look at my notes to see what episode are we in?
45.
45. Welcome, everybody, to episode 45 of the Books and Brews podcast. Thank you for tuning in. How you doing, Laura?
Well, today's a really bad day to ask if you want a positive answer. My husband and I have been either sick or shoveling snow for a solid week.
Or sick and shoveling snow.
Actually, yes, that's true. I'm sorry. I left out one other thing. Sick, shoveling snow, or scooping poop. As my son highly recommended I say, I try to watch my language, but a really shitty month.
Now we've blown our clean rating.
Scooping
on
it.
iPods or whatever the Apple.
Or as they say, I'm earning my PhD, piling it higher and deeper. We keep quoting that line. I don't know if you've ever seen the Drew Barrymore, Adam Sandler movie called Blended.
Nope.
It's a great movie, one of my favorites of all time. There's a line where the woman says, when Team Theodopoulos needs their toilet paper, the co-captain steps in, and those kids never stop crapping and go out to the outdoor, barn. That's what I think. Man, how do these little tiny chickens and little tiny rabbits put out that much output?
I've got a cat with kidney failure, and man, the amounts of urine that come out of that cat are truly stunning.
Yeah, I had a dog.
I understand completely.
Yeah, but apart from that, let me see. I released, it's the end of the year, so my publishing company's anthology came out, Startled by Laughter. And so this is all traditional poetry in new poems in traditional forms, so villanelles, sonnets, triolets, things like that, haikus, all on the subject of humor. And my son is back to wrestling, so I'm watching him pin people in 53 seconds if he's taking it easy on them, as his coaches actually sometimes tell him to do. And last one, I watched him take the guy down in 11 seconds.
Wow, that's fast.
Yeah, like he walks in there and the match is over before it even starts. He's just like boom, boom, and the guy's down and his arm is in the air. So
why would the coach tell him to take it easy?
Well, this is an interesting thing. I was never involved in sports, but the reason is the coach wants him to get what he calls real-time practice, because my son explained to me that when you're practicing with your teammates, you get to know them, you get to know their moves, you get to know the moves that the coach has taught all of them.
Got it.
When you're out with somebody else, you're actually learning if you don't just take them down like that, but if you give them a little time. And the coach knows he's good enough to take this guy down, so he'll get that close and then he'll let them up and see what else they have. And 53 seconds later, it's over anyway.
Wow.
So, it is interesting learning about sports, when I've never really been involved in them.
That is. Who would have known that taking it easy in competition so you could get practice?
Right. Right. Yeah. How about you? What have you been up to?
What have I been up to? Light shoveling. We got about 2 to 3 inches to your 4 feet.
Rub it in.
Following a succession of dustings.
Oh,
although
yeah.
The first one was not a dusting; it was a slushing.
We have
shoveling a slushy.
Right. That's actually been part of what's been difficult about the shoveling. Yeah. It has been that slushy stuff, and it is so heavy. Luckily, my son is here, and we have a Kubota tractor now. So my son last running his tractor up and down the driveway.
I bet. Otherwise, I wrecked my back somehow after Thanksgiving, and I've been dealing with that ever since. Been to the chiropractor, and it keeps getting better, and then flaring up again. So like right now, it's flared up again for some reason. I'm sitting on a heat pad right now.
It sounds like we're both in bad shape today.
We are. We're just falling apart.
I spent yesterday and last night on a heating pad, still sick. And so if I start coughing, Jen, you're lucky you're behind the screen.
And far, far, far away from us.
Well, I think healing wishes to you both.
Thank you all. Try not to.
Otherwise, not a ton going on. I think I had like breakthroughs on the banjo though.
Oh,
so
good,
I talked to my banjo teacher about this. It's like, you've told me when you're learning an instrument or actually learning anything, it kind of goes in plateaus.
Right.
And I have felt like I've been stuck on a plateau for a long, long time and just not getting anywhere. And then all of a sudden, it's like I can play things that I haven't been able to. My speed is increasing rapidly. All the chord shapes that are giving me such a hard time because my left hand moves really slowly compared to my right. Those are starting to come together, so I can actually get the shapes on the first try.
Exciting.
And then I had this other revelation. So I've been playing around with different string weights just to see what I prefer. And on the old banjo, I really preferred medium strings because the extra tension for some reason was helpful. On the new banjo, I've only had light strings on it. So I put medium strings on it thinking, well, I liked them better on the old one. I hate them on this new one.
So back to the light ones?
Back to the light ones. I put the light ones back on. But my banjo teacher said, because my old banjo was, $150 banjo. It was a toy, really.
Yeah.
He said, well, that old banjo, you kind of needed that extra tension to get any sound out of it. But this banjo sounds great, and you don't need it, and it's probably just slowing you down. Yeah.
That's every instrument is different. It is interesting.
Yeah.
So, did you get any reading in?
No. Well, quit reading. You should stop asking me that.
I know I should stop asking that. Only because I was sick in bed for multiple days this week. I finally finished my 600-page book with another 30 pages of historical notes at the end about your potential ancestor, Catherine Parr. So, yeah, I can't remember the author. It's called Lamentations. I think it's C.J. Sonome or something like that. I meant to have it here and I didn't because, life is just crazy even right now. So
I have actually been doing a lot more family research, and that's been fascinating because I've been combining it with Google Maps. So going to the places that like they lived in or were born in. In one instance, for a third great grandfather, I found a land ownership plat for this township in Missouri. And it just plotted out, who owned what little segment of land in this township. And so I pulled up that township on Google Maps, and the outline of it matched the map. And the roads were the same. So I could pinpoint that plot of land on Google Maps and then go to Street View and look at it.
That is so cool.
It was really cool.
Go with the flag and reclaim it. My great-great-grandfather owned a nice chunk of Minneapolis, and he sold it off because it was lousy farmland. So I do sort of feel that I've been cheated of my rightful ownership of the city, but I try and make do. So
who's our guest today?
Our guest today is Jen Gilroy. Let me turn on my flashlight. Oh, wait, these glasses make a huge difference. Jen Gilroy is coming to us from Ontario. She writes women's fiction for Orion Dash and sweet Western romance for Harlequin Heartwarming, uplifting stories about women finding home, family, and new beginnings, and finding themselves too. She is a Romance Writers of America Golden Heart finalist and was shortlisted for the Romantic Novelist Association Joan Hessayon Award. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
A dual British-Canadian citizen, Jen lived in England for many years and earned a doctorate in geography, focusing on British cultural studies and social history from University College London. She worked in higher education and marketing before becoming a full-time writer. She now lives in small-town Ontario, Canada, with her husband, teenage daughter, and floppy-eared rescue hound. When not writing, she enjoys reading ballet and paddling her purple kayak. Find out more about Jen via her website, jengilroy.com. By the way, I've been doing a lot of crosswords on my phone, and thanks to that, I suddenly realized for the first time in my life that kayak is a palindrome.
Oh, yes, it is.
Yeah, all these exciting things that we never thought about until we did.
Well, thank you for
And life
hosting
is
me.
better. So what's our
Welcome,
first?
Jen.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Thanks to you both for hosting me.
So you probably want to know what the first beer is, huh, Laura?
I do.
So our first beer is from Bad Weather Brewing in Minneapolis, actually it's in St. Paul, not Minneapolis. That St. Paul place that everybody talks about. I don't know where it is even. Minneapolis is all that really matters. But this one's in that St. Paul place. And this is their winter seasonal. It's a double brown ale called Ominous. I chose this beer for this reading because of the name. So in this reading, there's a lot of foreboding, a lot of sort of clouds on the horizon. There's an impending war. The protagonist finds himself in an unfamiliar place. There's just a lot of foreboding, a lot of concern about what's coming or what might come. And so I chose Ominous to suggest clouds on the horizon. It's a double brown ale, so it's a darker beer. It should be, I've not had this beer in a very long time. I think this one is fairly malty, probably some chocolate, and it's an American brown, so a little bit of hops as well. Cheers.
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 That's good.
I kind of sort of like the closest variation that it's going to be good on my throat.
Yeah, it should be malty. It should be malt forward, which is what you like. But yours is from Three Floyds, so it should have a lot of hops in it as well, because that's what they do.
Yeah. I do want to give a shout out to, I believe it's called the Mount Royal Bottle Shop. They were extremely helpful in helping me find something as close as possible when I find the actual beers that you picked out. So, Jen, first reading.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to start by just giving you and your listeners a little bit of an introduction to the book before I start with the first reading. My book is called The Sweetheart Locket. It's a dual time story, and that means that it's alternating between the Second World War and somewhat contemporary times in 2019. And it asks the question of what if the key to your present lies in the past? And in this book, The Sweetheart Locket, I tell the stories of two women, Maggie in the past, primarily in the 1930s, and Willow, her granddaughter, whom Maggie never met. But the story in each of these two timelines echoes the other story. It's a story of love, loss, and buried secrets, but with a hopeful and happy ending with a sense of resolution. And it also focuses on how past choices reverberate down the generations in a family. And I was particularly struck by how the two of you were talking about family history at the start of our chat today, because this book starts with an unexpected discovery in family history. Willow, in the present day, takes a DNA test, which she thinks will be a little bit of fun, but it has some very surprising results and makes her question who she is fundamentally and starts her off on a quest into her own family history. So the first reading that I've chosen, and I'm fascinated by the beer that you chose to pair with it, Michael. Thank you, because I think it's perfect, because there is a sense of ominousness and foreboding in this excerpt. It comes from the first chapter of The Sweetheart Locket, And we have Maggie, the heroine of the historical story, who makes a choice that has repercussions for not only her own life, but much later, the lives of her daughter and her granddaughter, Willow, who, as I mentioned, is the heroine of the other timeline in this book, too. So this excerpt then starts with Maggie in London, England in August 1939. Margaret Wyndham stood on the platform and crumpled the rail ticket in her damp palm. She'd done it. She couldn't change her mind or go home either, whatever home meant now. A whistle echoed, and the train slid out of the station, carriages clattering as if it were an ordinary journey on an ordinary day. Turning, she bumped into a man in laborer's clothes, a flat cloth cap atop his bald head. The bold black headline on the newspaper tucked under his arm sent a sliver of dread mixed with excitement to twist in the pit of her stomach. Sorry, the word came out in an accent that wasn't truly English, but now, after 5 years here, not Canadian either. Mid-Atlantic, the girls at school said. Girls who, although they were friendly enough on the surface, had given Margaret a sense of inferiority and being out of place. The girl who came from what they called the colonies, whose family had money, but not social status, and who didn't have the right accent, the right clothes, or the easy way in the world that came from knowing exactly who you were and where you belonged. She moved across the platform and propped her case against a metal railing. Her legs shook as she uncurled her fingers from around the ticket and stared at the ink until it blurred. There were other trains, but there wasn't another ship from Liverpool to Montreal with passage booked on it for her. Like the train that had disappeared around a silvery curve of track, the ship would sail tomorrow without her. You all right, love? She turned towards the speaker, a round, cozy woman with gray hair pinned into a bun. Yes, thank you. As the woman disappeared into the milling crowd, Margaret fumbled in her handbag, catching her passport in her sticky palm. She flicked it open and stared at the photograph with her name and signature below. Margaret Aline Savard Wyndham, the name that embodied a life she was destined for but had never truly wanted. She flipped the passport shut and tucked it back in her bag. Maggie Wyndham. She tried out the name's sotto voice. Maggie wouldn't be packed off to Canada like a parcel to be sucked into a life of obligations and routine. Maggie Wyndham was smarter and more independent than anyone had ever given her credit for. And she'd stay in England to do her bit for the coming war. She took her unused railway ticket into small pieces, tore it and tossed the bits of card above her head, where the wind whisked them across the rail line like awkward debutantes at their first ball. Her family couldn't be angry forever. She'd talk them around somehow. Pushing the doubts aside, she picked up her case and made her way through the crowd towards the station exit. It was her life, and if she didn't seize the chance to live it her way, maybe she never would.
I really like this. It kind of brings me back to actually my favorite author, Margaret Anderson's books that are set in that era. So, this to me is a fascinating concept, this idea that what somebody did 75, 90 years ago is still impacting our lives today. And in fact, Michael, remember our guest, Sean Brink? His book is like that. It's more almost a young adult novel, a Gypsy War Diary, but it's digging into how this amazing event happened like 70 years ago, and it's now coming out in these intruders in this little boy's home and all these amazing things like this shouldn't be happening. And it's because of what happened 2 generations ago. And then there's a really good one called Painting the Darkness by Robert Goddard. Similar story, but I don't see a lot of authors do this. So what drew you to this idea that there's this event 2 generations ago that's still impacting them that they don't even know about?
Both personally and as a writer, I'm fascinated by family history. And I often think about past choices, past events, and how without certain things happening, for example, I perhaps wouldn't be here. My father, for instance, was in a very serious accident as a young man, ended up bobbing about in the Atlantic Ocean. He was in the Canadian Navy. And if he hadn't been rescued and had met the same, very tragic, watery grave as many of his friends, I wouldn't be here. So it's that question of, as an author, I always ask, what if? And in the case of the Sweetheart Locket, there's a little spark for that story in my own family history, in that I had a great aunt whom I knew as a very elderly woman, but she was working in England just prior to the Second World War, because I do have British family ancestry as well. And she was summoned home to Canada by her father, and of course safety, because, and as a parent myself, I understand why you would want your child, no matter how old they were, to come home and not be stuck in a war zone. But as a very elderly woman, I remember her saying, what if I'd stayed in England? How would my life have been different? And as writers, we find story ideas everywhere. And I remember just noting that down and thinking about this story and thought, what if I had a heroine as a young Canadian woman who was indeed summoned home, but unlike my great aunt, decided to stay? And what would that impact her life and also the lives of her descendants? So it does come from family history, and as always, as a writer, asking that what if question.
Right. That what if question draws everything. I thought I wrote a standalone novel, and I thought I killed the character off at the end, and my sister read it and said, well, what happens next? And I thought, well, he's dead, so nothing. And I went back and I reread it and realized I never said he is dead, and that what if sparked another 4 books. He survived that injury. And all of a sudden, instead of a standalone book, I had a 5-book series. So, and I believe you actually have a Sweetheart Locket, don't you?
Yes, I do. It is, just to give you and the listeners a little bit of context, a Sweetheart Locket is part of the tradition of Sweetheart Jewelry, which people serving in the armed forces in both the First World War and Second World War gave to loved ones at home. And there were lockets, bracelets, a lot of brooches as well. And I do have my very own RAF, which stands for Royal Air Force, the British Royal Air Force, Sweetheart Locket, which dates from that era.
It was go ahead and hold it up really close to the camera.
Okay.
Very nice.
You can see the RAF insignia on it. It's probably difficult to see on this view.
And does that open up?
No, it doesn't. Not anymore. It did originally. But this is a Second World War vintage piece, and it's not from my own family, but I got it. I bought it from a US vintage dealer.
Oh, okay.
Because at the same time as I was asking this what if question, the last time I was in the UK before the pandemic, I visited the Homefront Museum in Llandudno, Wales, which is a fantastic museum with displays focused on what life was like in the home front. So I saw Sweetheart Lockets there and thought, what if? Where did they come from?
Right. Yeah, strangely enough, I found a similar locket while I was cleaning out my things just a few days ago. So, Michael, we are ready for beer number 2.
Beer number 2 is Fuller's London Pride. It is one of the classic English best bitters. It's the type of beer that you would be drinking in a pub in England traditionally. Probably cask conditioned, pulled from the cask. This is bottled. So it is an English pale ale or an English best bitter. I chose this beer for this reading because there's this, again, the sense of anticipation. Except this time it's good anticipation of spending time in England. So I just thought, well, what might we be drinking during this good time in England? And so I went with a classic English bitter. Like I said, the beer you might be drinking in a pub. So,
and I got
cheers.
foam primarily. It looks like it's going to.
That's because yours is probably nitrocarbonated, so it's going to foam up, but that foam will dissipate fairly quickly.
Yeah.
It's a little bit malty, but quite bitter. I knew you wouldn't like this. Yours is actually maltier than mine, though. Old Speckled Hen is maltier than most bitters.
That's all the reasons I don't like beer right there.
Mm-hmm.
If I only ever had, what was the first one, my substitute that I found, the Alpha Clause, I think it was called.
Yeah.
You found plenty of things I do like, but that right there is the kind of stuff that made me not like it in the first place.
I think it's delicious. Like I said, it's fairly balanced. You get some caramely malt, but there's a good hit of bitterness in the finish, and there's some herbal hops in there, and English yeast strains give this kind of orange marmalade character, which really comes out in the London Pride. English bitters are delicious. They used to be my favorite style of beer, and then I started drinking Pilsners.
And that was better. So we're ready for, I think you're done. I think we're ready for reading number 2. You can tell I'm still sick. I was about to say beer number 2 again.
Well, thank you. And that beer brings back memories of my London and English home. So thank you for that. This second excerpt comes from the contemporary strand of the story, where we have Willow, Maggie's granddaughter, in San Francisco, California, in June 2019. 2 more sleeps. Willow Monroe checked her messenger bag to make sure she had the folder with her research notes, locked the door of the office, and stepped outside into the afternoon sunshine. England, the place she'd traveled to in her imagination for almost her entire life, would soon be the place she'd visit for real. She touched the locket nestled at her throat and gave a little skip. Crossing a leafy park, she headed towards her dark green Mini, wedged into a narrow parking space on a residential street beneath a towering strawberry tree. She unlocked her car, and grabbed her phone, Aretha Franklin's Respect ringtone echoing from the depths of her bag. Hey, Safi. Willow greeted her cousin and settled into the driver's seat, tossing her bag beside her. What's up? You never call me at this time of day. Is everything okay? I don't know. Safi's tone was uncharacteristically hesitant. You remember the DNA test I gave everyone for Christmas? Sure. You pestered me for months, so we finally did it together. My mom as well. Did you get your results yet? Safi's voice was careful. An email came in earlier, but I haven't had a chance to open it. I got my results too, Safi said. I wanted to wait to look at them until I could talk to you. I thought it would be interesting to compare. Sure, why don't we talk later? No, we need to talk now. Your mom called me. Since I gave her the test, I guess she thought I could help her figure out what the results meant, so I looked at mine too. It's not a big deal. Like Christmas and birthdays, the two of you can never wait to open presents. I think it could be a big deal. Safi paused. I might be interpreting your mom's results wrong, but look at yours. Now, I'm parked near work. If I don't leave here soon, it will take me ages to get home. The little house in No Valley had given Willow the small town life she craved in the middle of a big city, and she'd managed to buy it almost 20 years before, thanks to money she'd inherited when her gran, Margaret, passed. Although she'd never met her, that English gran had still been an important part of Willow's life, and the locket Willow wore almost every day had come from her. Her granddad had given it to her gran before he left to fight in the Second World War, a sweetheart locket because it had the Royal Air Force insignia on the front, and was part of the tradition of military-themed jewelry servicemen sent to women at home. What's so urgent it can't wait a few hours? This, Safi's voice was soft but determined. I said your mum's results were probably a mistake, but look at yours so we know for sure. If there's a family secret.
I really enjoyed this. Now, I have to say, I had so much trouble getting your book from NetGalley, like I was supposed to be able to read it. I never was. I never figured out how to actually access
No.
Yeah, so I wasn't able to read the whole thing, but I did read everything on Amazon, and I found this, very interesting, in part because it's a very new concept, this idea that you took a DNA test and you found out something that you never could have known in a prior generation. And so as I was reading it, I was thinking, like, for instance, my ex-husband took a DNA test and found out he's Irish, like from Ireland. And he found out he's actually 2% Indian, as in from India, which we figured, okay, probably somebody in the Irish army was in India, years ago. But it's not what my kids expected to find out. They're part Indian. And in my mom's family, supposedly they're German, but they have a lot of red hair. And they've always asked, is there an affair somewhere that we don't know about? Are we really part Scot or Irish? I was curious, do you have any statistics on how common this is for somebody to get a shock when they do their DNA test?
I don't have any statistics, no, but I sort of anecdotally, I see lots of and read lots of newspaper and magazine articles. Mm-hmm. I've seen a number of them over the past few years where people have done these tests, and all of a sudden, huge surprise that perhaps one of their parents wasn't who they thought was a parent, or they have an unusual genetic makeup. They thought they were entirely Anglo-Saxon, but yet there are all sorts of other things in there, like you found in your own family too, and it just seems something that is increasingly common, because right. We do have what is a technology that was never anticipated at the time. These family secrets. Right.
When you thought things could be hidden forever. And
yes.
I am curious, to Willow, apparently it's going to be quite a shock and something difficult to face, that her heritage is not what she's always believed. And I've had some friends who have found that their heritage is completely different. In fact, at least two. I've got some kids who are heavily invested in the fact that they're Irish, and I've got other kids who just don't care, like they're so what? What do you think makes the difference, that some people are very invested in this and some people will really be thrown for a loop to find out they're not the heritage they thought they were?
I think in cases where people are very attached to and proud of their family history, it can make a huge difference to their sense of self. In the Sweetheart Locket, for example, Willow has always thought that she has had a fully British and Scottish ancestry. And it's why she has been so interested in England and Scotland, why she's always wanted to travel there, with being a character who lost her father at a very young age, and felt that her faraway grandmother in England was the only person who understood her because they wrote letters to each other. So in her case, she seized upon this family history as being absolutely fundamental to who she is. And in her case, when she finds out that she has a considerable proportion of Italian and Jewish family ancestry, she's completely thrown, because it's the opposite of everything that she thought she was. And it's not in a bad sense having Italian and Jewish ancestry, but it's, who am I if I'm not this British person? And why didn't I know about this?
Right. And again, I would suspect that's more common than many of us have ever thought. And the DNA tests are going to really bring that out. Now, you have a background in marketing, communications, business development, and academic editing. How have those things helped you in your work as an author?
I think that they have all given me skills that have helped me transition to the writing life. And certainly my academic background in historical research, social and cultural studies has really shaped this book, because I was looking at British history and recent, British social cultural history, wartime. So it shapes how I tell stories, because this is a book that required a lot of story, based on history. It's also my first historical title. So my academic background influenced that. Also working as an editor, as you know, as an author, you have to do a lot of editing. And once you write the first draft, then another type of work entirely starts, and that's the editing work. And I'm really grateful to be working with excellent editors, because an editor makes an author's book better. And having worked as an editor myself, I understand the role that editors play. So that has helped me as an author. And then as a marketeer, you have to promote your books to readers. And so those skills have come into play as well.
So I have just one last question before we go on to beer 3, and I can't believe we're up to beer 3 already. Do you like watching ballet, or did you actually dance ballet?
I like doing both. I returned to ballet as an adult, to adult classes, because it was a passion of mine as a child and teenager. And then, I grew up, I stopped, and I returned to ballet a couple of years ago and take adult classes in a studio here in my small town.
Do you perform?
No, this is just for exercise.
I just have to throw this story in. When I first lived in Duluth in the early 80s, we had a neighbor named Eileen Boniface, and I want to say she was, maybe early 60s when I knew her. Of course, I was 12. She seemed really old to me. But she had been a Rockette in New York City when she was 16, went off with her sister and danced as a Rockette. And I believe pretty close until she died, probably in her 80s. She was leading a group here in Duluth called the Silver Foxes, and they were women, I think, from 50 into the 80s who were still in their fishnet stockings dancing and performing. She was just the neatest person, and I thought of that when I saw your comment about ballet. And I thought, well, I should immediately assume you mean you like watching it, but then I thought of Eileen Boniface and said, not necessarily. So that was really
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Beer number 3.
Beer number 3. The beer that I have is KEREL Bière de Garde. It is a Belgian beer. It is amber colored, malt forward, with enough hop bitterness to balance it. But what makes it unique is this very peppery, phenolic fermentation character to it. It's actually a really delicious beer. I was surprised to find it because I haven't seen a Bière de Garde style in the Twin Cities in forever and ever. Even the one that you have, Laura, which used to be available everywhere, I haven't seen it in the Twin Cities forever and ever.
I'm fighting with here. Yeah, this is the closest that they came. Can you pronounce that? Abbé de Saint-Bonchen? How close?
That sounds right.
Okay.
Um, so I chose this beer because this reading is in a French village. And I was, again, thinking what would we be drinking there? So France is wine region, obviously. But if you get up to northern France along the Belgian border, that Belgian beer culture kind of spills over. And you have this farmhouse style called Bière de Garde, beer for storage.
That's what that means.
So cheers.
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 That has a really interesting flavor. I'd love to know how it compares to what you have.
It's probably very, very, very different.
Right. It's unfortunate. We have to plan ahead because the day you sent me that list, I was actually down in the Twin Cities watching wrestle. And, I didn't think to tell you that because I didn't know you'd list out early. And obviously you wouldn't have picked up 2 of each, but we could have had the same thing this time.
Well, actually, I had to get a 4-pack of this. So.
Oh, did you? So you would have had one.
I would have had one.
It occurred to me like halfway home, I should have maybe checked in.
Yes. Your example, I haven't had that beer that you have in forever and ever and ever.
But you have had it.
I have had it long, long ago. I suspect it's better than the one that I have, although I really enjoy the one that I have. Yours is way more traditional.
I like it. Now, it's the kind of thing that I think would grow on me the more I drink it, but I already like it. It's got what did you say yours has, like a peppery taste?
Peppery, yeah, it's a fermentation character.
I can taste that.
Yeah.
It doesn't taste to me like beer. It's, I would almost say it's got a sweet taste to it. It's to more of the bitter taste that I expect from beer. So this to me is a very fascinating one. I would love to be able to compare what you have to what I have, but
me too.
The computer. It's not going to happen. So reading number 3.
Thank you. And you've just, that beer has brought back memories for me of family holidays in Belgium. So thank you for that.
Oh, wow.
As well.
You get all the great beer cultures.
This third excerpt, again, comes from the historical strand. So we go back to Maggie, who was in the first excerpt, following her granddaughter Willow in the contemporary second excerpt. But in this little bit, Maggie is on her first undercover mission as a secret agent, what we would now think of as a spy, although women did not describe themselves that way. But she was helping the French resistance, as part of Britain's wartime special operations executive, the SOE, which was very unusual in that they recruited women as well as men because they thought, quite rightly, that women would be less obvious than men, wandering about the French countryside in wartime, for example. So here we are with Maggie in northern France in July 1943, so in the middle of the Second World War. Maggie propped her bicycle against a stone wall in front of a boulangerie, the scent of fresh baked bread wafting through the open door. She scanned the village square, bustling this Saturday morning in high summer. Near the church, women with wicker baskets over their arms chatted beneath a tree, its leafy green branches sheltering them from the hot midday sun. Children played a game with stones and a red ball, their excited shouts rising above the noise of a market set up near an old horse trough. Maggie's breath hitched as she bent towards her bicycle and fiddled with the string bag on top of the basket. An army vehicle rumbled over the stone bridge that spanned the slow-moving river in the center of the village, and she stilled, the hairs on the back of her neck prickling. The vehicle came to a stop in front of the church, and 2 men got out, their light hair gleaming in the sunshine before they adjusted their caps. German soldiers. Maggie glanced from side to side. She was exposed, and the next safe house was almost a mile outside the village. Act normal. She wasn't Maggie. She was Solange, and Solange was here wearing French clothes with a cover story of being on an errand for her French farming family. She had papers to prove it. She pretended to kick the rear bicycle tire, conscious of the footsteps coming closer and shiny black boots kicking up dust. Is there a problem? Both pairs of boots stopped beside her. The voice spoke German accented French. The tire might be losing air. A puncture, perhaps? Maggie got to her feet and made a helpless face. Let me see. One of the soldiers, a man about her age, crouched beside her bicycle and felt the tire. It seems fine to me. Thank you. She pushed the words out, her mouth dry. Sweat trickled down the back of her blouse. What have you got in your bicycle basket? The other soldier stood beside the first. He was older and stocky with small, deep-set gray eyes in a florid face. My shopping, Maggie made her expression bland, and some food from my family's farm for a friend. Indeed, the older man's voice was harsh, his French awkward. She stepped back and leaned against the stone wall, pressing her knees together beneath her skirt to stop them from shaking. The village square had gone still. The market hushed, and even the boisterous children were silent. The man grunted as he rummaged in the top string bag and said something to his companion in German. The younger man smiled at Maggie, his warm blue eyes twinkling. She tried to smile back as the man pulled out small parcels of sausage and cheese, along with eggs, courgette, garlic, and peppers, and 2 tins of foot powder. The book. Stop there. Don't look any further.
That is a very stressful scene. Like, what's going to happen? I was really interested when I read this in what kind of research did you put into 1939, into the French Resistance? Does any of this stem from your doctorate in geography that dug into social history?
It doesn't stem directly from my PhD in geography. However, the research skills that I developed through that degree certainly shaped the research that I did for the historical portion of the book. In addition to general published sources, I read a number of diaries and letters written by women in wartime generally, as well as women who were part of the Special Operations Executive. I did some research at London's Imperial War Museum, which was very helpful. And Maggie's experience undercover in France is certainly shaped by many of the brave women, and of course men too, who served as secret agents and helped support the resistance. So her story is very real, although it's a compilation of other real women's stories.
Right. One of the most interesting books I think I've read about this era was called The Book of Lost Names, and it's about an 18-year-old named Ava who is using her artistic talent to forge documents. And I was curious as I read this, what would be one of the most interesting stories you learned about during your research?
So many that it's hard to pick just one. But I think in summary, the bravery of all of these people is astonishing. And these were very young people, early 20s, many of them who were parachuted in under cover of darkness, but on moonlit nights. They were parachuted in from England under extremely difficult circumstances, and had to live someone else's life, really, because they were given an entirely different identity, a French identity. people who served as undercover had to have a native proficiency, as it would be called, in French.
Mhm.
But you couldn't let anything slip about your real life. And so I think that was the most interesting, was how do you spend all this time living a false life and becoming more accustomed to lying than telling the truth?
Mhm.
And you could never let your guard down. So yes, it wasn't so much an individual story of being of interest. It's collectively this living a different
Right.
life.
And I think you make a really powerful point about how young they were, and I kind of am living this every day, since my son joined the Army when he was 18. He's the one who just told me, oh yeah, I met a truck on the way out. What did he say about the truck, whatever it was? He's 20 years old and he's out driving semis for the Army, and it scares me to death. And then I think, and instead of driving semis, he could be in a war zone.
Yes.
And I wish that more people would take that to heart about how much we really can do at a very young age. And we're living in a society where life is so darn easy that most 20-year-olds are like, oh man, I didn't get the high score on my video game or whatever. And video game is probably like a decade out of date or something. But I did want to ask, one last question as we're running out of time here. You started writing when you were quite young and you won a semifinals and you took a break from writing. Why did you take a break and what drew you back to it?
The short answer to that is that life happened. I went to university. I got a serious adult job, and although I always read, I was really busy with other things in my life. And then I suddenly arrived at a point in my life where I'd had a number of really huge and traumatic losses. And it was a reminder that life is short. And I had always wanted to be a published author. It was always there in the back of my mind. And I decided that if I didn't start to try to write stories and return to what was my first love, it would be too late. And I didn't want to have that regret. So I started relearning how to write fiction again.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a powerful message, that so many people have these things they want to do. I was having this talk with one of my daughter-in-laws a couple months ago, and I said, I always wanted to write a symphony. And I said it in this tone as if, and it's too late now. And she's like, well, why don't you then? When, my story is much like yours. I set aside writing because life happened. And then I reached a point where a lot of really awful stuff happened. And I said, I always wanted to be a published author. I can either sit here and mope or I can go write a book. And I wish that more people would think like you did on that subject. So
well, thank you. And I was just going to say, for anybody listening, it is truly never too late. As long as you're still here, you could still write your book, or you could still do whatever you dream of doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's so inspirational that you're also back to ballet. And it makes me think, I loved ballet too, which is part of why that interested me. So I should see if there's a ballet class around here. What's next for you?
I have 2 more historical dual time women's fiction with romantic elements stories coming out. And they are both focused on wartime. The next book, which will be out in 2023, is called The Secrets of Grey Oaks Hall. It also has a wartime focus and a contemporary focus and family secrets. And I'm excited about that too. I'm working on edits at the moment for that book.
Very exciting. And I think we are at the end of our program where Michael asks, or am I supposed to ask?
No, well, first you asked, where can we find us?
Oh, like I said, I've been sick all week. Beer all morning. What do I know? All right, Michael, where can our 7 million listeners find us?
All right, I am at aperfectpint.net. We are at booksandbrews.net and Book and Brews on Instagram. and Books and Brews with Laura Vosica and Michael Agnew on Facebook, and then some weird YouTube channel.
With a string of letters and numbers. If people put Books and Brews in the search engine, it'll come up. There are several YouTube channels called that. So I'm at lauravosica.com. I'm at laura.vosica.author at Facebook, and I have an Instagram page that I'm never on, but it probably has something to do with Laura Vosica too. So, Jen, where can our 7 million listeners find you?
My first point of contact, excuse me, is my website, which is www.Gilroy, Gilroy.com. And the links to my social media are there. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as Jen Gilroy Author, or Twitter as Jen Gilroy 1. And you can also find my newsletter and my blog on my website. And I hope that people will check in with me because I love chatting with readers.
And I should add that if you go to Jen's page, you will find she has a variety of settings and time periods for her novels. So you have some in
Montana? Yes.
America's Vermont. Wild West. And what?
Vermont and New York State.
Vermont.
Too.
Okay. Yep. And
all right. So, Laura, who do we have next turn?
We actually have, I believe this is a good friend of Jen's. And I'm using her author name. She writes under her own name and under the author name. She'll be presenting next month one of her books under her pen name, Ava Glenn, or Ava Glenn. Is it Glenn?
Yes.
Okay. Ava Glenn writes emotional fiction inspired by beautiful places and the stories they hide. And automatically the kind of snarky part of me wants to go, who sets a book in a place that's miserably ugly? But on the other hand, there is time and place for that. But she likes beautiful places, and so do I, and the stories they hide. She loves to travel, and her last trip before the COVID lockdowns was to Croatia, where she met a man with an incredible story of growing up during the country's homeland war in the 1990s. It inspired the olive grove set on the island of Korčula, I hope I'm saying that right, and 2 more Croatian novels have followed, both taking their inspiration from the Second World War. An Island of Secrets, which I believe we'll hear from next month, was published in 2022, and The Collaborator's Daughter will follow in 2023. Her books are published by HarperCollins imprint One More Chapter. Ava lives in Cornwall, although she considers herself Welsh, and has been lucky enough to have been married to the love of her life for more than 25 years. She also writes as Jane Cable. So, given that I'm sick, I think I'm doing really well. I didn't just keep reading the email and not realize that's not part of her biography.
All right, well, that sounds excellent. Another writer from overseas.
Yep.
I like
and
this
I'm excited because I've been to Croatia, so I'm really looking forward to talking to her.
Yeah. All right, Jen, I want to thank you for joining us today and chatting and sharing your thoughts and your words.
Thank you very much to both of you. It was a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you.
This has been Books and Brews, episode 45. Thank you, everybody out there, for tuning in. Tell your friends. Cheers.